The sun hung low over the vast savanna of Kruger National Park, casting long shadows across the acacia-dotted plains. Dust swirled in the warm breeze, carrying the faint scent of dry earth and wild grasses. In the underbrush near the Oliphants River, a mother leopard named Kira prowled silently, her spotted coat blending seamlessly with the dappled light filtering through the thorn trees. She was a survivor, fierce and elusive, navigating the dangers of the African wilderness with the instincts honed by years of evading lions, hyenas, and the ever-encroaching threat of human encroachment. Kira's latest cub, a tiny bundle of fur no more than 3 months old, tumbled out from her side. He was a spotted leopard cub, his coat a mosaic of rosettes that promised the camouflage of his future. Let's call him Miko, after the Swahili word for the lost one, though his mother knew him only by the soft mewls and playful pounces that filled their hidden den. Miko's eyes, wide and golden, sparkled with innocent curiosity as he chased a rustling leaf, oblivious to the perils that lurked beyond the safety of his mother's watchful gaze. The park, sprawling across South Africa's northeastern border, was a sanctuary for wildlife, but poachers had long tested its boundaries, driven by the black market's insatiable demand for leopard skins and parts. As the afternoon wore on, Kira paused to groom Miko, her rough tongue smoothing his fur while he nuzzled against her, seeking warmth and milk. The river's gentle flow provided a backdrop of serenity, but beneath it all simmered the tension of survival. Rangers from the park's anti-poaching unit patrolled these lands daily, but the poachers were cunning. Locals sometimes, or syndicates from farther afield, slipping in under the cover of night with wire snares and rifles. Miko, full and content, ventured a few steps away, his tiny paws patting softly on the sun-baked soil. He didn't see the glint of metal hidden in the grass, a crude trap set by poachers the night before. Before the story goes deeper, make sure to subscribe for more narratives like this. The snare was a simple but deadly device, a loop of thick wire camouflaged with leaves and tied to a sturdy stake driven into the ground. Poachers had placed it along animal trails, betting on the luck of catching something valuable. Miko's playful bound triggered it. The wire snapped tight around his foreleg with a sharp twang that echoed like a whip crack in the quiet bush. He yelped, a high-pitched cry that pierced the air, his small body jerking as the noose bit into his flesh. Panic surged through him. He twisted and clawed at the ground, but the more he struggled, the tighter the snare pulled, drawing blood and eliciting whimpers of terror. Kira's head snapped up at the sound, her muscles coiling like springs. She bounded toward her cub, nostrils flaring as she caught the metallic tang of blood mixed with his familiar scent. Miko thrashed wildly, his spotted form a blur of desperation against the earth. The wire held firm, anchored deep, and his leg was already swelling, the skin torn where the rough cable dug in. Kira circled him, sniffing cautiously, her low growls a mix of maternal fury and helplessness. She nudged him with her muzzle, trying to urge him free, but the snare was unyielding. Her powerful jaws clamped onto the wire, tugging with all her strength, but it only elicited more pain from Miko, who cried out again, his body trembling in shock. In the distance, the poachers' camp lay hidden in a thicket of mopani trees, a makeshift setup of tents and crates where 3 men huddled over a fire. Leading them was Elias, a wiry Zimbabwean in his 40s, his face scarred from years in the bush. He'd crossed the border illegally, drawn by rumors of easy scores in Kruger. With him were 2 accomplices, young Thomas, eager but inexperienced, and grizzled Peter, who handled the snares with a veteran's precision. They weren't after leopards specifically. Elephants or rhinos fetched higher prices, but anything Big Cat would do for the skin trade. "Tomorrow we check the lines," Elias muttered in a thick accent, poking at the embers. "Something's bound to be caught by now." They laughed coarsely, passing a bottle of cheap whiskey, unaware that their trap had ensnared something far more vulnerable. Back at the snare, Miko's struggles weakened as exhaustion set in. The sun dipped lower, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, and the savanna came alive with the evening chorus of insects and distant bird calls. Kira stayed close, her body shielding him from potential predators drawn by the scent of blood. She paced in tight circles, her tail lashing, occasionally licking the wound on his leg to soothe the pain. But Miko was terrified, his breaths coming in ragged gasps, eyes darting wildly for escape that wouldn't come. The wire had cut deep, restricting blood flow, and infection loomed if he wasn't freed soon. In the wild, such injuries often meant death, a slow, agonizing end from predators or sepsis. Miles away, in the park's Skukuza headquarters, American wildlife biologist Dr. Elena Vargas coordinated the evening patrol. Elena, a 35-year-old from California with a sun-freckled face and a no-nonsense demeanor, had come to Kruger 2 years ago through a U.S.-funded conservation program. Her team, a mix of local rangers and international volunteers, monitored camera traps and radio collars, fighting the poaching surge that threatened the park's big cats. Elena sipped black coffee from a chipped mug, reviewing maps on her laptop. "We've got reports of snare lines near the river," she said to her colleague, Ranger Thabo Mthembu, a burly South African with a deep voice and sharp eyes. Thabo nodded, checking his rifle. "Poachers are getting bolder. Last week, we found a hyena in one, nearly lost it." As dusk settled, Elena's radio crackled to life. A spotter drone, launched earlier that day, had picked up unusual movement near the Oliphants. "Possible distress call," the operator reported. "Sounds like a cub." Elena's heart quickened. Leopard cubs were rare sightings, and any in trouble meant immediate action. She grabbed her kit, sedatives, wire cutters, and a portable GPS, and rallied the team. The jeep roared to life, bumping over rutted tracks as they raced toward the coordinates. The drive was tense, headlights cutting through the gathering dark, the air thick with the promise of confrontation. By the time they neared the site, Kira had retreated into the shadows, her eyes glowing like embers as she watched the intruders approach. Miko lay still now, his tiny chest heaving, the snare a cruel shackle glinting in the flashlight beams. Elena spotted him first, her breath catching at the sight of the cub's frightened form. "Easy, little guy," she whispered, kneeling slowly to assess the damage. The leg was badly lacerated, but he was alive, barely. Thabo scanned the perimeter, rifle ready, while another ranger, Maria, prepared the tranquilizer for the mother if needed. The rescue was underway, but the poachers weren't far. Elias and his men, hearing the distant engine, stirred from their camp. They grabbed their weapons, slipping into the night like ghosts, intent on protecting their haul. Miko's fate hung in the balance, a tiny spark of life caught in the web of human greed and the fragile hope of intervention. The savannah held its breath, the river murmuring on as the drama unfolded under the starlit sky. Elena moved with deliberate caution, her gloved hand steady as she shone the flashlight on Miko's trembling form. The cub's golden eyes locked onto hers, wide with a mix of fear and exhaustion. His tiny body curled protectively around the injured leg. The wire snare had dug in deep, the skin raw and bloody, with dark bruising already spreading up his forelimb. "He's in shock," she murmured to Thabo, who stood guard a few paces back, his silhouette tense against the moonlit scrub. The air was thick with the metallic scent of blood and the earthy dampness rising from the nearby river, a stark contrast to the sterile labs back in California where Elena had first trained. Kira's low growl rumbled from the shadows, a warning that sent a chill down Maria's spine. The ranger, a local woman in her late 20s with calloused hands from years of tracking, kept the tranquilizer dart gun at the ready but lowered it slightly. "She's close, but not attacking yet," Maria whispered, her voice steady despite the adrenaline. Elena nodded, her mind racing through protocols she'd drilled into her team during countless simulations. Leopards were solitary, fiercely protective mothers, and one wrong move could turn this rescue into a tragedy for everyone involved. "Thabo, cover me," Elena said softly, inching forward on her knees to minimize her profile. She pulled a soft cloth from her kit and draped it over Miko's head to calm him, the fabric muffling his whimpers. The cub flinched at first, his body going rigid, but the exhaustion won out, and he stilled. With wire cutters in hand, sturdy ones forged for just these moments. She positioned them carefully around the snare, avoiding any sudden jerks that might worsen the injury. The metal snipped with a sharp click and the loop loosened just enough for her to ease Miko's leg free. Blood trickled anew, but the pressure was off, and a faint sigh escaped the cub as relief washed over his small frame. Elena worked quickly, applying a pressure bandage from her pack to staunch the bleeding. The wound would need stitches and antibiotics back at the clinic, but for now, stabilization was key. Miko's breathing steadied slightly, his eyes half closing under the sedative patch she'd applied, a mild one to keep him from bolting in panic. Kira's growls grew more insistent, circling at the edge of the light, her tail flicking like a whip. Elena froze, holding Miko gently against her chest, feeling the rapid thump of his heart through his fur. "We need to get him out of here," she said, glancing at Thabo. "But the mother's not going to let us just walk away." Thabo radioed for backup, his deep voice cutting through the static. "Unit 2, we have a Leopard cub snare victim at Oliphant's coordinates. Mother on site, requesting the capture team." The response came crackly, another jeep en route with nets and more tranks. But it would take 20 minutes at best. The savannah was vast, and night patrols stretched resources thin. Elena cradled Miko, whispering reassurances in English, though she knew he couldn't understand. Her thoughts drifted to her own life back home, the quiet suburb in San Diego where she'd grown up, far from this raw edge of wilderness. Conservation had pulled her here, a calling sparked by a childhood trip to Yellowstone, but moments like this tested her resolve. From their thicket camp, Elias crouched low, peering through the branches as the rangers' lights bobbed in the distance. The engine noise had faded, replaced by voices and the faint cries of the animal. "They found something," he hissed to Thomas, who gripped his rifle with white-knuckled hands. Peter, ever the pragmatist, spat into the dirt. "Our snare. If it's the Leopard, we're out of skin. And maybe more if they trace it back." Elias's scarred face twisted in anger. Poaching wasn't just about the payout anymore, not with syndicates pressuring him for bigger hauls. Crossing from Zimbabwe had been risky, but the border fences were porous, and Kruger's bounty tempted like a siren's call. "We move in quiet," Elias decided, signaling them to flank the site. No shots unless cornered. Dead rangers meant international heat they couldn't afford. As the poachers crept closer, rustling through the dry grass, Elena's team sensed the shift. Thabo's ears, attuned to the bush, picked up the subtle snaps of twigs. "We're not alone," he warned, raising his rifle and sweeping the beam across the undergrowth. Maria fired a warning shot into the air, the crack echoing like thunder and scattering night birds into flight. Kira bolted deeper into the shadows at the noise, her protective instincts overriding her urge to stay near Miko. The cub mewled weakly in Elena's arms, the sound tugging at her heartstrings, a reminder of how fragile these creatures were against human folly. The poachers froze, then retreated slightly, cursing under their breaths. Thomas's inexperience showed. He nearly tripped on a root, drawing a sharp glare from Elias. "Idiot!" the leader muttered. They couldn't risk a firefight, not with the Rangers' backup incoming, but losing the snare's catch stung. Elias had families back home relying on his runs, kids who went to bed hungry without the cash from pelts. Greed blurred into necessity in his world, but tonight it clashed head-on with the law. Elena's jeep pulled up minutes later, the capture team spilling out with efficiency born of practice. They set up a perimeter, floodlights casting harsh shadows that made the scene feel like a movie set, though the tension was all too real. With Miko secured in a padded crate lined with soft blankets, Elena monitored his vitals on a portable device, the screen glowing green for stable. "He's a fighter," she told Maria, who nodded with a small smile. The wound was clean enough for transport. Surgery at Skukuza's vet facility could save the leg, maybe even his life. But Kira, now vanished into the night, haunted Elena. Mothers like her often abandoned injured cubs to survive themselves, a brutal calculus of the wild. As they loaded the crate into the vehicle, Thabo spotted boot prints in the soft soil near the snare, fresh, human. "Poachers were here tonight," he confirmed, bagging a snippet of wire for evidence. Elena's jaw tightened. This wasn't the first, but each one chipped away at the park's fragile balance. The drive back was somber, the Jeep's tires humming over the gravel as stars wheeled overhead. Mikko slept fitfully in his crate, the terror of the snare fading into uneasy dreams. While far behind, Elias and his men melted back into the bush, plotting their next move. The river flowed on, indifferent to the lives it cradled and the conflicts it witnessed, a silent witness to the unending struggle between man and nature. In the clinic at Skukuza, under the hum of fluorescent lights, Elena prepared for the operation. The facility was a far cry from the high-tech hospitals in the States, basic but functional, stocked with donations from wildlife orgs worldwide. She scrubbed in, her mind on Mikko's golden eyes, praying the cub's spirit would pull him through. Outside, the night deepened, and Kira prowled alone, her world irrevocably altered by the intrusion of lights and voices. The savannah whispered secrets of resilience, but for now the tiny spotted leopard hung on a thread, his rescue a beacon of hope amid the encroaching dark. The sterile glow of the operating room in Skukuza's wildlife clinic cut through the humid night air, a bubble of controlled chaos amid the surrounding wilderness. Dr. Elena Vargas adjusted her mask, her hands steady as she wielded the scalpel over Mikko's sedated form. The cub lay on the steel table, his spotted fur shaved in a neat patch around the injured leg, revealing the angry red gash where the wire had bitten deep. Intravenous lines snaked from his tiny paw, delivering fluids and painkillers, while the steady beep of the heart monitor provided a rhythmic underscore to the procedure. Elena's team worked in sync, local vet techs from the area, their faces etched with the quiet determination of those who'd seen too many such battles against poaching's toll. "Clamp here," Elena directed softly, her voice muffled but authoritative. The wound was worse up close. Torn muscle fibers, a fractured radius from the thrashing, and early signs of tissue necrosis if infection took hold. She irrigated the area with saline, flushing out debris from the snare's rust, her mind flashing to the cub's terrified eyes under the flashlight back at the river. Mikko had been so small, so vulnerable, a living emblem of the savannah's innocence caught in humanity's crossfire. As she sutured the layers, first the deep tissues, then the skin, Elena's thoughts wandered to her own path. Growing up in San Diego, she'd dreamed of this work after volunteering at a local animal shelter, but nothing prepared her for the raw emotion of piecing together a life shattered by greed. Outside the clinic, Ranger Thabo Mthembu paced the gravel lot, his rifle slung over his shoulder as he scanned the tree line. The poachers' boot prints they'd found gnawed at him. They were too fresh, too deliberate. Thabo had grown up in a village on the park's edge, where poverty pushed some toward the illegal trade. But he chose the badge instead, driven by stories from his grandfather about the old ways of respecting the land. The night was alive with the chirps of crickets and the occasional hoot of an owl, but an unnatural quiet hung over the camp, as if the bush itself anticipated trouble. He lit a cigarette, the flame briefly illuminating his weathered face, and exhaled slowly. "Those bastards won't stop," he muttered to Maria, who joined him with a thermos of strong tea. Maria sipped thoughtfully, her dark eyes reflecting the clinic's windows. "Elena's got the cub stable, but if the mother doesn't find him, it'll break her." As a ranger, she'd relocated cubs before, but leopards were ghosts, elusive and unforgiving. Kira, somewhere out there, would be hunting alone now, her maternal drive clashing with survival's harsh math. The team had set up camera traps near the snare site before leaving, hoping to track her, but the odds were slim. Maria thought of her own daughter back in her township home, safe, but facing the same world's inequalities that fueled poaching rings. Inside, Elena tied off the final stitch, applying a light splint to immobilize the leg. Mikko's chest rose and fell evenly, the anesthesia wearing off just enough for a faint twitch of his whiskers. "Vitals are good," she announced, stepping back to let the techs monitor him in recovery. The clinic's recovery pen was a spacious enclosure with soft bedding and infrared heat lamps, mimicking the den's warmth. Elena peeled off her gloves, flexing her fingers against the ache of tension. Success here felt personal. Each animal saved was a stand against the syndicates draining Africa's wildlife. But exhaustion tugged at her. Jet lag from her last U.S. trip lingered, mixed with the emotional weight of cases like this. As dawn crept over the horizon, painting the sky in soft pinks and golds, Elias and his men regrouped in their Mopane thicket. The failed night had soured their mood. The whiskey bottle lay empty, and Thomas nursed a bruised ego from the retreat. "We should have cut the line ourselves," the young man grumbled, kicking at a root. Elias shot him a glare, his scarred cheek twitching. Born in Harare's slums, he'd turned to poaching after losing his farm to drought, the syndicates offering a lifeline with promises of quick cash for skins shipped to Asian markets. But Kruger was no easy mark. Rangers like Thabo knew the terrain better than outsiders. "Quiet!" Elias snapped, peering through binoculars at the distant clinic lights. "They took the cub. Means it's alive. Worth something if we can steal it back." Peter, methodically cleaning his rifle, shook his head. "Too risky. Vets will tag it, track us." He'd poached for decades, from ivory to cats, always one step ahead until borders tightened. The trio debated in hushed tones, the fire's embers dying as the sun rose. Elias's mind raced. The leopard skin could fetch thousands, enough to pay debts back home, but the cub was small, barely viable. Still, desperation won. They planned a midday raid, using the park's tourist traffic as cover. Dressed in faded khakis to blend as locals, they dismantled camp, slipping toward Skukuza like shadows. Back at the clinic, Elena emerged into the morning light, rubbing her eyes as she checked on Miko through the pen's viewing window. He stirred weakly, lifting his head to sniff the air, his golden eyes clearer now but shadowed by confusion. The splint held firm, and the antibiotics were already combating any brewing infection. "You're going to make it, kid," she whispered, her voice thick with unshed tears. Conservation wasn't just science for her. It was a fight for dignity, echoing the civil rights marches her parents had marched in during California's turbulent 60s. She radioed Thabo, "Cub's out of surgery. Keep eyes on the perimeter. We might have company." Thabo acknowledged, his patrol jeep idling nearby. The park awoke with the rustle of impala grazing and the distant trumpet of elephants, but beneath it, tension simmered. Maria reviewed drone footage from the night, spotting faint movement in the thicket. Human shapes, evasive. "They're coming back," she said, alerting the team. Alarms were set, subtle tripwires around the clinic that would ping their radios without alerting intruders. By mid-morning, as tourists in safari vehicles rumbled past the main gate, oblivious to the drama, Elias's group approached from the bush. Sweat beaded on Tomas's forehead. The heat was relentless, the air heavy with dust and the scent of wild sage. They skirted the fences, hearts pounding, drawn by the lure of reclaiming what they'd earned. But Thabo was waiting, hidden in a blind, his fingers steady on the radio. The confrontation loomed, a clash of worlds where one wrong move could end in blood. Elena, sensing the shift, stayed with Miko, stroking his fur gently as he dozed. The cub's soft purr vibrated against her palm, a fragile thread of trust forming in the face of adversity. Outside, the savannah stretched endlessly, its beauty a double-edged sword, paradise for some, battleground for others. The river's murmur carried on, a timeless flow witnessing the fragile dance of rescue and pursuit, where hope flickered like the morning sun against the encroaching threats. The mid-morning sun climbed higher, baking the red earth around Skukuza's clinic into a shimmering haze. Elena lingered by the recovery pen, her fingers still tracing gentle circles on Miko's flank through the wire mesh. The cub's purr had faded into shallow breaths, his bandaged leg extended awkwardly as he tested its limits with tentative shifts. The splint held, but Elena knew the real test lay ahead, rehabilitation in the wild, if he could be returned to Kira at all. Her own coffee from the mess hall sat cooling on a nearby bench. The bitter American roast a small comfort from home amid the clinic's earthy scents of antiseptic and hay. Inside the pen, Miko blinked awake, his golden eyes fixing on Elena with a wary curiosity that tugged at her chest. He was a survivor, this one, his tiny frame already showing the resilience of his kind, muscles quivering as he pushed up on 3 legs. Elena spoke softly, her voice carrying the lilt of her San Diego upbringing. Words meant more for her own reassurance than the cub's understanding. "Hang in there, buddy. We've got you now." She checked the IV drip, adjusting the flow of nutrients. The surgery had gone textbook, but shock from the trauma lingered and his temperature fluctuated under the heat lamps. Outside, Thabo's patrol jeep idled in the shade of a marula tree, its engine a low rumble that blended with the distant calls of vervet monkeys. He wiped sweat from his brow, the rifle across his lap a familiar weight. The tripwires Maria had set were invisible threads of defense, linked to silent alerts on their radios. Thabo's mind replayed the boot prints from the Snare site. Size 10s, worn treads from cheap boots, likely smuggled across the border. He'd seen poachers like Elias before, desperate men from neighboring countries, where economic collapse funneled them into syndicates that promised riches for a leopard's pelt or claws. But Thabo's loyalty ran deeper, rooted in the Zulu tales his grandmother told of animals as kin, not commodities. Maria joined him, her boots crunching on the gravel as she handed over a pair of binoculars. Drone feed shows movement. 3 figures, heading this way from the eastern fence line. Her voice was clipped, honed by years of night shifts and close calls. Born in a township near Nelsprout, she joined the Rangers to escape the cycle of poverty that snared her cousins into petty crime, finding purpose in protecting what little wild space remained. The binoculars revealed shapes weaving through the acacias. Elias in the lead, his scarred face set in grim determination, flanked by Thomas's jittery steps and Peter's steady prowl. Elias paused at the fence's edge, the chain-link barrier topped with razor wire that glinted under the sun. He'd cut through similar ones before, using bolt cutters hidden in his pack. But Skukuza's security had tightened after a rhino poaching bust last season. The clinic lay just beyond, a squat building of concrete and tin roof, surrounded by enclosures where injured animals recovered under watchful eyes. "The cub's in there," Elias whispered, his Zimbabwean accent thick with urgency. Back home, his wife waited with their 2 boys, the last remittance from a skin sale buying school fees for 1 term. Poaching wasn't pride for him, it was survival, the syndicate's middlemen in Johannesburg dangling threats if quotas weren't met. Tomas fidgeted, his youth betraying nerves, 18 and already in too deep, lured by tales of easy money. "Wait for the shift change," Peter advised, his voice a gravelly murmur. He'd lost an eye to a buffalo horn years ago, the patch over it a badge of hard lessons. They crouched in the scrub, the heat pressing down like a physical force, sweat soaking their shirts. Flies buzzed around them, drawn to the salt on their skin, while in the distance, tourist jeeps trundled along the main road, cameras flashing at grazing giraffes. The irony stung Elias. These visitors paid fortunes to glimpse the wild, funding parks that hunted men like him. At the clinic, Elena's radio buzzed to life. "Intruders inbound, 200 meters east," Maria's voice crackled. Elena's pulse spiked. She secured Miko's pen with an extra latch and grabbed her sidearm from the desk, a compact Glock issued for field work, though she'd never fired it in anger. Her training back in the States emphasized de-escalation, but Kruger demanded readiness. She stepped into the sunlight, the glare forcing her to shield her eyes, and joined Thabo behind a stack of supply crates. "What's the play?" she asked, her American directness cutting through the tension. Thabo's eyes narrowed. "We let them come close, then surround. No shots unless they force it." He motioned to 2 other Rangers emerging from the admin building, their rifles at low ready. The team formed a loose arc, hearts pounding in the stifling air. Miko, sensing the unrest, let out a plaintive mewl from inside, the sound carrying like a siren's call to the approaching men. Elias made his move, snipping the fence with muffled clicks. They slipped through, bellies to the ground, the grass whispering against their clothes. Tomas's breath came in short gasps, the thrill of the raid mixing with fear. 50 meters out, a tripwire pinged, silent to them, but a flare in the Ranger's ears. Thabo rose slowly, his voice booming across the clearing. "Halt! South African National Parks, drop your weapons." The poachers froze, then bolted in panic. Thomas fired wildly over his shoulder, the shot cracking harmlessly into the sky and scattering birds from the trees. Elias cursed, shoving Peter toward cover as bullets whizzed past, not return fire, but warning rounds from Maria's rifle. The chase erupted. Thabo and the team fanned out, jeeps revving to cut off escape routes. Elias dodged behind a water tank, his mind racing. Abandon the raid or fight? The cub was close, its value a ghost pulling him forward, but the ranger's shouts echoed his growing dread. Elena stayed back, guarding the clinic, her gun drawn but steady. Adrenaline surged through her veins, a rush she'd felt during urban drills in California, but amplified here by the stakes. Mikko's safety hinged on this. A breach could mean losing him to the very hands that trapped him. Inside, the cub huddled in his bedding, ears flattened, the morning's peace shattered. Peter tripped on a root, sprawling into the dust where Thabo tackled him, wrenching the rifle free. "You're done," Thabo growled, cuffs clicking into place. Thomas surrendered with hands up, tears streaking his face, while Elias vanished into the bush, a lone shadow fleeing toward the river. The takedown was swift, the air thick with dust and the acrid tang of gunpowder. Maria radioed for reinforcements, her voice triumphant yet weary. As the poachers were secured in a holding room, Elena checked on Mikko again. The cub trembled but was unharmed, his eyes meeting hers with a spark of recognition. The raid's chaos had forged an unlikely bond, a testament to human intervention's double edge. Thabo wiped blood from a grazed arm, nodding at Elena. "One down, but the leader's loose. This isn't over." The savannah baked on, indifferent, as the team caught their breath, the fragile victory a momentary shield against the poaching storm. Farther out, Elias melted into the heat waves, vowing return. The cycle of pursuit unbroken under the relentless sun. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on Skukuza's holding area, turning the concrete interrogation room into a sweltering oven. Ranger Thabo Mthembu leaned against the wall, arms crossed over his broad chest, watching as Peter and Thomas sat handcuffed to the metal table. The air was thick with the smell of sweat and stale cigarette smoke, the single fan overhead doing little to stir the heat. Peter, the grizzled veteran with his eye patch, stared at the floor, his calloused hands twitching slightly. Thomas, barely out of his teens, kept wiping his nose on his sleeve, his eyes darting like a cornered animal's. Thabo had seen this before, the bravado crumbling under the weight of capture, leaving only regret and fear. Elena Vargas paced outside the door, her boots scuffing the dusty ground as she reviewed the incident report on her tablet. The raid had been a close call. A stray bullet had nicked Thabo's arm, leaving a shallow gash now bandaged under his sleeve. But they'd secured 2 poachers and their gear, bolt cutters, a half-empty ammo box, and wire remnants matching the snare at the Oliphants. It was evidence enough to tie them to Mikko's injury, and maybe more if forensics linked it to other incidents. Elena's mind raced with the paperwork ahead. Statements for Sandparks authorities, notifications to Interpol for the cross-border angle. Back in California, her days had been filled with grant proposals and lab work. But here, justice felt immediate, visceral, a direct line from rescue to reckoning. Inside, Maria entered with a tray of water cups, her expression neutral as she set them down. "Drink if you want," she said flatly, her township accent carrying an edge of disdain. Thomas grabbed his eagerly, gulping it down, while Peter just pushed his aside. Thabo leaned forward, his deep voice filling the room. "Names, where you're from, and who you're running for." Peter met his gaze for the first time, the good eye narrowing. "You think water buys talk? We're just hunters, mate. Bad luck on the wrong side of the fence." Thomas cracked first, his voice trembling. "It's Elias. He's the boss. From Zim, crossed last week. Said the cat would sell quick in Joburg." The words spilled out like a dam breaking, details of the syndicate's drop points and payment routes tumbling forth. Peter shot him a venomous look, but stayed silent, his code of silence holding for now. Thabo jotted notes, the pen scratching against his notepad. He'd grown up hearing stories of men like these, Neighbors turned poachers by empty promises and empty stomachs. But sympathy didn't dull his resolve. Each arrest saved lives, human and animal alike. Elena joined them briefly, slipping in to observe. Her presence, with her American poise and sharp questions, unsettled Thomas further. Why the cub? Leopards are protected, endangered. You knew the risks. Thomas shrugged weakly, avoiding her eyes. Money. My ma's sick back home. Elias said it was easy. Elena's jaw tightened. She'd heard the excuses before. The poverty defense that masked the syndicate's grip. In her work with U.S. conservation NGOs, she'd lobbied Congress for funding to combat exactly this, trafficking networks that funneled African wildlife to luxury markets in Asia and beyond. But hearing it raw, from the source, hit differently, stirring a mix of anger and pity. As the interrogation dragged on, Miko rested in his recovery pen. The midday heat filtered through mesh screens that kept insects at bay. The cub had ventured a few wobbly steps on his splinted leg, testing the boundaries of his enclosure with cautious sniffs at the air. Elena checked on him between duties, noting how his appetite returned with small portions of minced meat laced with vitamins. His golden eyes followed her movements now, less with fear and more with tentative trust. A bond forged in the clinic's quiet hours. She thought of Kira out there, alone in the bush, her maternal instincts likely tearing her apart. Camera traps near the river had captured fleeting glimpses. The mother leopard pacing the snare site at dawn, sniffing the ground where her cub had been taken, her roars echoing into the night. Word came over the radio that Elias had evaded the dragnet, slipping across the Limpopo back to Zimbabwe under cover of the midday haze. Thabo cursed under his breath as he stepped out for air, the savannah's vastness mocking their efforts. One fish escapes, brings more, he said to Elena, who nodded grimly. They'd alert border patrols, but Kruger's 19, 0 square kilometers were a labyrinth of game trails and dry riverbeds, perfect for ghosts like Elias. The leader's escape meant the syndicate would regroup, perhaps sending reinforcements or shifting to rhinos for bigger payouts. Elena's team had already upped patrols, drones buzzing overhead like mechanical birds of prey. In the late afternoon, as the sun dipped toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the acacia groves, Elena drove out to the Oliphant's site for a follow-up sweep. The jeep bumped over familiar ruts, the river's murmur growing louder as she approached. Thabo rode shotgun, his bandaged arm a reminder of the morning's frenzy. They parked near the snare's location, now marked with evidence flags fluttering in the breeze. The air carried the faint, coppery residue of blood, washed away by a light rain earlier but etched in Elena's memory. She knelt by the stake, bagging soil samples for any DNA traces, poacher or animal. Kira's scent lingered, faint but unmistakable, a musky trail leading into the thicker mopane. Elena followed it cautiously, her heart pounding with a mix of hope and dread. Rangers had debated releasing Miko with a tracking collar once healed, hoping to reunite him, but Leopard's solitary nature made it a long shot. Deep in the underbrush, she spotted fresh prints, Kira's larger paws overlapping smaller ones from night creatures. The mother was surviving, hunting impala by the signs of a fresh kill dragged nearby. But her ribs showed through her coat, the stress of loss taking its toll. Back at the clinic as dusk fell, Elena prepared a report for her U.S. funders, detailing the raid's success and Miko's progress. The cub ate heartily that evening, his mules turning playful as he batted at a soft toy in the pen. Thabo dropped by after shift, sharing a thermos of rooibos tea, bitter and earthy, a South African staple that Elena had grown to crave. Tomorrow we track Elias's route, he said, his voice steady. Can't let him circle back. Elena agreed, the weight of the ongoing fight settling like the cooling night air. Miko curled up in his bedding, the splint a temporary scar on his spotted form, while outside, the stars emerged over Kruger, indifferent witnesses to the human drama unfolding beneath them. The savannah quieted, save for the distant whoop of hyenas as Elena lay in her bunk, sleep evading her. Thoughts of home, beach walks in San Diego, her parents' pride in her work, clashed with the raw reality here. Miko's rescue was a win, but Elias's shadow loomed, a reminder that the war against poaching was endless. In the pen, the cub dreamed fitfully, his tiny chest rising and falling, the bond with his unseen mother pulling at him across the miles. The river flowed on, carrying secrets of resilience and ruin into the heart of the wild. The first light of dawn filtered through the canvas blinds of Elena's bunkhouse, painting faint stripes across the wooden floor. She stirred, the night's restless thoughts clinging like dew on the acacia leaves outside. The distant roar of a lion echoed across the park, a primal reminder that life in Kruger pulsed on, unyielding and indifferent to human interventions. Elena swung her legs over the bed's edge, pulling on her field boots with practiced efficiency. Sleep had come in fits, haunted by visions of Miko's golden eyes and the ghost of Elias slipping through the border fences. Today marked the start of Miko's rehabilitation phase, a delicate dance of healing and release planning that could make or break his return to the wild. In the clinic's recovery pen, Miko was already active, his splinted leg held gingerly as he prowled the edges of his enclosure. The cub's movements were tentative, a far cry from the playful bounds Elena had imagined in his natural habitat, but progress shone in the way he devoured his morning ration of ground goat meat, laced with supplements to rebuild his strength. She knelt by the mesh, her fingers slipping through to offer a gentle scratch behind his ears. Miko leaned into it, a soft rumble vibrating in his throat. Not quite a purr, but close enough to stir hope in her chest. "You're getting there," she murmured, her voice carrying the soft cadence of California sunsets, a world away from this dusty frontier. Thabo arrived shortly after, his jeep kicking up red gravel as he parked. The bandage on his arm was fresh, courtesy of the clinic's med kit, but he moved with the same unshakable poise. Border Patrol picked up Elias's trail last night, footprints leading to a smuggler's boat on the Limpopo, he said, handing Elena a steaming mug of instant coffee. The brew was harsh, nothing like the artisanal blends from Seattle roasters she'd once favored, but it cut through the morning chill. Thabo's eyes, sharp under his ranger's cap, scanned the horizon. He's gone for now, but syndicates like his don't quit. We'll debrief the captives again today, see if Thomas spills more. The interrogation room felt even stuffier in the morning light, the metal table scarred from years of tense exchanges. Peter sat stone-faced, his eye patch casting a deeper shadow over his weathered features, while Thomas slouched, his youthful bravado eroded by the reality of bars. Maria led the session, her questions probing like a snare's wire. "The drop point. Who meets you in Joburg?" she pressed, leaning forward. Thomas hesitated, glancing at Peter, who gave a subtle shake of his head, but the weight of consequence pressed down. Back home in his rural Zimbabwe village, his mother's illness loomed like a storm cloud, the promise of poaching cash now a bitter illusion. "It's a guy named Victor," Thomas finally muttered, his voice cracking. "Drives a white bakkie, parks near the market on Sundays, pays half up front, rest on delivery." Peter's jaw clenched, but he said nothing, his silence a wall built from decades of evasion. Elena listened from the doorway, taking notes on her tablet. The details matched patterns from Interpol briefs she'd reviewed during her last stateside conference. Networks funneling Leopard parts to traditional medicine markets in China, where a single pelt could fetch $5. It wasn't just greed, it was a global chain, linking desperate locals to affluent buyers half a world away. Her work here fed into reports that influenced U.S. aid, but the disconnect frustrated her, theory versus the blood on Miko's leg. By midday, with the sun hammering the tin roof like a relentless drum, Elena shifted focus to Miko's physical therapy. The clinic's outdoor run was a fenced paddock of soft sand and low branches, designed to mimic the savanna without the risks. She coaxed the cub out with a trail of meat scraps, watching as he hobbled forward, his good paws digging into the earth. The splint restricted him, but instinct drove him to climb a stump, his claws scraping bark as he balanced precariously. Elena's heart swelled at the sight, a spark of the wild rekindling. Yet doubt nagged. Without Kira, Miko might never learn to hunt, doomed to dependency or worse, rejection upon release. News from the field interrupted the session. A ranger patrol near the Oliphants had spotted Kira again, this time dragging a fresh duiker kill toward what might have been their old den site. The drone footage, grainy but clear, showed her pausing to scent the air, her ribs more pronounced under her dappled coat. Elena reviewed the clips in the ops room, the hum of the projector fan underscoring the tension. "She's searching," she said to Thabo, who nodded grimly. Reunions were rare miracles in conservation. Mothers often disowned scent-altered cubs, viewing them as threats or weaknesses. But Elena's program had succeeded twice before, with cheetahs using playback calls and gradual introductions. For Miko, it meant weeks of conditioning, teaching him to respond to recorded Leopard vocalizations while monitoring Kira's patterns. As afternoon wore on, the team huddled for strategy. Maria suggested scent enrichment, rubbing Miko with soil from the Snare site to mask the clinic's human odors. Thabo advocated for increased anti-poaching sweeps, deploying more camera traps along Elias's likely return routes. "He'll come back with muscle," Thabo warned, his voice low. "Syndicates don't like loose ends." Elena agreed, her mind bridging the Atlantic to her funders in Washington, where she'd pitch this as a holistic win. 1 cub saved, 2 poachers off the streets, and intel to dismantle a ring. But personally, it was Miko's wide-eyed trust that anchored her, a reminder of why she'd traded boardwalks for Bushveld. In the holding cells, Peter finally broke during a quiet moment with Maria. Over a shared cigarette, contraband but humanizing, he confessed fragments. The syndicate's enforcers in Harare. Threats to families if quotas slipped. "It's not for sport," he rasped, smoke curling from his lips. "Drought took my land. This was the only way." Maria listened without judgment, her own family's struggles echoing his words. Poverty's snare was as tight as any wire, pulling good men into darkness. She relayed it to Thabo, who filed it for prosecutors, mitigating factors perhaps, but not absolution. Evening brought a cooling breeze off the river, carrying the tangy scent of rain on the horizon. Elena walked Miko back to his pen, the cub limping less now, his steps gaining confidence. He nuzzled her hand before settling into the straw, exhaustion claiming him as the sky bruised purple. Elena lingered, watching the rise and fall of his flanks, her thoughts drifting to Kira's solitary prowl. The mother's roars from the footage replayed in her mind, calls of grief and fury that bridged species, tugging at universal maternal bonds. Back in her bunk, Elena sketched release protocols by lamplight, the pen scratching like Miko's claws on bark. Elias's escape loomed like a storm cloud, but for tonight, progress held sway. The savannah whispered on, its rhythms a testament to endurance, as stars pricked the velvet sky above the restless wild. Weeks turned into a blur of humid days and starlit nights in Kruger National Park, the savannah's relentless cycle marking time as Miko's rehabilitation progressed. Elena Vargas watched from the clinic's observation deck, her notebook filled with meticulous entries on the cub's milestones. The splint had come off 2 weeks post-surgery, revealing a leg scarred but functional, the fur growing back in patchy rosettes that spoke of resilience. Miko now bounded across the enlarged outdoor enclosure with a lopsided gait, his golden eyes sharper, reflecting the wild spark that had dimmed under the snare's terror. He pounced on shadows cast by acacia branches overhead, his playful growls echoing the distant calls of his kind, a sound that stirred something deep in Elena's chest, a mix of pride and the quiet ache of impending goodbye. Thabo Mathembu joined her one crisp morning, the air carrying the crisp bite of winter's approach, even as the sun warmed the red earth. His arm had healed to a faint pink line, a badge from the raid that he'd wear without complaint. "Border patrols nailed Elias yesterday," he said, his deep voice laced with satisfaction. "Snagged him at a roadblock near Bitebridge, trying to hitch a ride with a trucker. The syndicate's middleman, Victor, too, backy full of wire and pelts." Elena nodded, relief washing over her like the cool river breeze. Interpol's net had widened from Thomas and Peter's confessions, unraveling threads that connected Harare slums to Johannesburg warehouses and beyond. The poachers faced charges: illegal entry, wildlife trafficking, assault on rangers, But Thabo knew the system. Fines, short sentences, then back to the bush for some. Still, it was a dent, a momentary breather for the Leopard slipping through the shadows. Maria, ever the optimist, had taken charge of Miko's scent training. She collected soil and leaves from the Oliphant site, rubbing them into the cub's bedding to weave the river's earthy tang into his world. Miko sniffed eagerly, his nose twitching as memories stirred, faint echoes of Kira's warmth and the den's hidden safety. Elena reviewed the latest drone footage in the ops room that afternoon, the screen flickering with Kira's solitary figure. The mother leopard had claimed a new territory nearby, her coat filling out from successful hunts. A bushbuck fawn here, a hare there. But her roars at dusk carried a haunting edge. Searches for a lost cub that patrols captured on audio. Playback ready for the reunion attempt. Elena's heart clenched at the sight. Kira's ribs no longer showed, but her eyes in the infrared glow held a weary vigilance, as if the savannah itself mourned her solitude. The release plan crystallized over shared meals in the mess hall, Braai-grilled boerewors and pap, the smoky flavors grounding the team's high-stakes discussions. Elena sketched maps on napkins, plotting a soft release site near the original Snare, a camouflaged pen where Miko could acclimate, with camera traps monitoring Kira's approach. Risks loomed: rejection, predation by hyenas, or the cub's inexperience. But Elena's data from similar cases offered hope. Back in California, her mentors at UC Davis had praised her protocols. But here, under Kruger's vast sky, it felt profoundly personal. Nights found her on the bunkhouse porch, sipping rooibos tea with Thabo, trading stories of home. He spoke of his village's communal hunts, respecting the land's balance. She shared tales of San Diego's crowded beaches, where wildlife meant seals on the pier, not the life-or-death stakes of a snare. As the day of release dawned, a soft rain pattered on the clinic roof, turning the paths to mud that clung to boots like regret. Miko was crated gently, his protests muffled as Elena secured the latch, her gloved hand lingering on the wire. "This is your world." "Little one," she whispered, throat tight. The Jeep convoy rumbled out, Thabo driving, Maria with the playback device, 2 more rangers for perimeter watch. The drive to Oliphants wound through golden grasslands, Impala scattering like confetti, the river swelling from the shower into a muddy ribbon. They arrived at midday, the site transformed. A temporary enclosure of natural brush and shade cloth, stocked with water and meat hides to ease the transition. Unloading Miko, Elena watched him emerge, sniffing the air with wide-eyed wonder. The scents hit him like a wave: river mud, acacia bloom, the faint musk of his homeland. He limped forward, then paused, ears pricking at the first playback. Kira's recorded roar, amplified from hidden speakers. Miko's head tilted, a tentative mewl escaping his throat, raw with longing. The team held their breath, hidden in a blind 50 meters out, hearts pounding in sync with the savannah's pulse. Hours passed, the sun drying the rain into steam that rose like ghosts from the earth. Twilight brought the miracle. Kira slunk from the mopane thicket, her spotted form a shadow among shadows, drawn by the calls and the scent of her blood. She circled the enclosure warily, nostrils flaring, her golden eyes locking on Miko's through the mesh. The cub froze, then pressed forward, his injured leg forgotten in the surge of recognition. Kira's growl softened to a chuff, a mother's greeting, and she paced closer, rubbing her flank against the barrier. Elena's eyes welled. Science met instinct in that moment, the wild reclaiming its own. Overnight monitoring confirmed it. Kira breached the soft fencing at dawn, nuzzling Miko into the bush with gentle nudges. Camera traps captured their departure, mother and cub vanishing into the undergrowth, a reunited pair against the encroaching world. Elena exhaled a breath she hadn't known she held. The jeeps returned to Skukuza, silent with awe. Thabo clapped her shoulder. "You gave him back his life." Maria smiled through tears, the team's bond forged tighter in victory. Back at the clinic, as stars blanketed the sky, Elena stood on the deck, the river's murmur a lullaby. Miko's rescue had rippled outward. Tighter borders, more funding from her U.S. contacts. a story that would fuel campaigns against the syndicates. But for her, it was the cub's final glance, wild and free, that lingered. The savanna endured, its leopards elusive guardians, a fragile balance restored one life at a time. Leave a comment sharing what you thought about this story.